Hi, I'm Dave from boyinaband.com, and I'm going to show you how to make this Skrillex-y dubstep bass growl synth from my NextUp competition entry. It's quite a complicated synth, but if you follow through, I'll explain why it works so you can take this knowledge and develop your own different synths with a similar kind of grittiness and power. Okay, let's begin. So first, we're going to right-click and create a combinator, just to keep everything in, followed by a line mixer, 6:2, and an instance of Thor Polysonic Synthesizer. Right-click and initialize the patch, then open it up with Show Programmer. So we have a nice clean slate. Now I'll copy across the notes, there we have them, and I'll solo it out so we can hear our epic bass. That's not entirely the kind of sound we're aiming for, so let's get to work. Back up in the combinator, we're going to make 3 different oscillators. First, we want a wavetable oscillator, which will give us the vast majority of the growling tone. Turn it down a couple of octaves, and scroll to the Mixed Waves 1 wavetable. Now, since wavetable synthesis is the basis of this kind of tone, I figure it warrants an in-depth explanation. A wavetable is a collection of waveforms, each of which produce a different sound. Now, if we open up an analog oscillator, we can see that there's a few different waves available, but the wavetable has a lot more, 128 in this case, and usually they are kinda similar to each other, changing subtly throughout the table. Think of it as an evil scientist genetically manipulating a series of 128 puppies. The first one, let's call him Fluffy so we can get suitably emotionally attached, might be a regular cute little puppy, and then the next one might have a slight lump on his shoulder from the genetic manipulation, which grows bigger through puppies 2 to 59 as the scientist tries more radical genetic violations, and by 60 we have a puppy with another head. Puppy 120 might have 3 heads, and by puppy 127 we'd have a fully fledged giant mutant guardian of the underworld. In fact, let's call this synth Cerberus. So, before that extended metaphor gets me in trouble with the RSPCA, let's explain what we can do with these waveforms. We'll soon be making this synth change between waveforms as the sound progresses. This is why those growly synths sound like growls, because the mutant puppies are angry. Because a growl involves the mouth shape changing over time. Try emulating the sound yourself without changing your mouth shape, and you'll see what I mean. You'll also sound really silly. So that's where the position parameter here comes in. The parameter allows us to move between all 128 waveforms. Take a listen. Okay, we'll make this movement automatic in a minute, but first we need a multi-oscillator, which will give us a nice mid-range thickness since the wavetable on its own is pretty weedy. We're going to take it down a couple of octaves as well. We'll take a listen to that so far. And we're going to make it a little bit less detuned. Since a deep sound needs to be relatively in tune to stop it being muddy, there's a very important difference to be discerned in dubstep basses between dirty, which is awesome, and muddy, which is bad. We don't want Cerberus here treading mud all through our clean mix now, do we? Okay, I'll promise I'll stop extending that metaphor. Then we want this analog oscillator I've got in here. Let's take it down an octave and leave it just on the default saw wave for a bit more thickness. Run that through. I find analog oscillators work well with multi-oscillators for thickening up a sound whilst maintaining power. Alrighty, now we've run them through into the filter, we're going to mess with this mixer. Let's balance it a bit more towards our wavetable. And bring down number 3, the analog oscillator, about half the way down. Something like that. So the other sounds don't completely swamp our growly wavetable. Now, let's do a bit of housekeeping before we move on to the good stuff. Take the amp sustain to full, so it doesn't lose volume over time. Up here, we're going to turn it to mono legato, so it's only one note at a time. And then we're going to turn on the portamento, so it slides between the notes. And this gives a lethargic, powerful feel to the overall sound. Now the roboticness. In filter slot 1, we're going to swap this low-pass ladder filter for a comb filter. A comb filter is basically a really short delay effect with the frequency, here, relating to how short the delay is and the resonance as to how much of the sound you feed back. So a higher resonance results in a longer sound, and a more pronounced metallic tone. Make sure the ENV is on 0, so the filter envelope down here doesn't mess with our beautiful robotic dog. Maybe this synth should be called Robo-Cerberus. No, I promised. I'll continue. Frequency, we're going to take, a quarter is a nice starting point, and we're going to take resonance to about the same. Now, let's modulate some stuff. Turn on the LFO1 tempo sync, so it's in time with the song, and move the rate to 4/4. So it oscillates once every bar of the song. Now, let's route it first to the Oscillator 1 position, like we mentioned earlier. So down here, select Source, LFO 1, and Destination 1 is going to be Oscillator 1, pos for position, if you didn't guess. But 80 should do it. Check it out. If we solo it out now, just that one effect. Let's move the pos down a bit. There, nice and throaty. Then we're also going to route it to the comb filter frequency. So destination 2, filter 1, frequency, by about 100. Check it out. This starts to give the sound some serious movement. However, the growl sometimes gets entirely taken out by the filter, so we're going to run this wavetable through filter 2 and into the amp, with that little button there as well. So we get the clean signal from it and the robotic goodness. Cyborg Cerberus, perhaps? I think I have a problem. So, there's our basic tone. At the moment it's very muddy, but we'll sort this out in a second. First, we're going to right-click and duplicate devices and tracks. Slightly altering the frequency on the comb filter of this new one we've made. Hit Tab, and then drag the audio output 1 up into a channel of the mixer, which will automatically bring number 2 as well, so it's stereo. Oh, down here. Then in the mixer, hit Tab to look at the front again, and we're going to pan one about half the way right, and the other one half the way left. In fact, listen as I do that. This way we get a nice wide sound, and since they are subtly different, it really makes for a big tone. In fact, if we go down to the new Thor instance and change the amount value that we're modulating the Oscillator 1 position to -80, the growling kind of moves slightly in the stereo field too. So check it out. Hugely emphasizing that width. Now to turn this wide, powerful, muddy mess into something clear and defined. Firstly, on this mixer, right-click and create Scream for Distortion. We're going to bypass this for now, and I'll explain about this later, but the next item you create will automatically slot itself between the mixer and the combinator, as long as you're right-clicking this mixer. So, right-click, create M-Class Equalizer, another equalizer, and a compressor. This will be a demonstration in how absolutely freaking awesome and necessary EQ is in making professional sounding synths. So the first EQ we'll use to boost around 2.5 kilohertz. So let's go all the way up to around that with, about 10 decibels. A nice wide 1.2 Q should do the trick. Now this brings out that cutting razor tone to the sound. Check it out. Much nicer. To remove the muddiness though, let's take a leaf from metal guitar production and scoop out the mids. So up here, we're going to go down to about 400 Hertz, hold shift to get more accurate control over these parameters. And let's take it down about, 11 decibels and quite wide. 2Q I've got there. Without and with. That makes it much deeper. Now for that final professional sheen, bring up a nice high 7 kilohertz, something around there, by 8 decibels and 1.5 Q. So, let's show this without the EQ, and with it. See how vital it is? Obviously, it'll depend on what source sounds you end up using as to which frequencies to mess with. Knowing where to boost and cut EQ comes with a lot of practice. I've made more songs than I can remember, and it's only been recently that I've been able to make a synth this clear, and I bet with more practice, it'll get even clearer and more powerful. Keep practicing and you'll develop this technique. Lastly, let's even out the volume a bit with this compressor. Take the attack and release down, so it's kind of acting more as a limiter, I guess. Ratio to full, and let's take this threshold down to about -25, and that just squashes everything nicely. So without it, and with it. And that just makes the synth more manageable in the mix later on. Last but not least, add in a sub. A subtractor synth, that is. Right-click, create subtractor analog synthesizer. Initialize it. And this sub-bass is what will really make it shake floors, so make sure you have one in your track or the audience will laugh at your puny little bass. Make it one polyphony, so it's one note at a time. Then we're going to have two sine waves. Turn on Oscillator 2, one of which is going to be down to 2 octaves and the other one 3. Now if we take a listen to that just on its own, you can hear there's a slight overtone, so bring down that filter a little bit to cut that off. And then bring up the level to just before it starts to distort. We're going to bring it up on the mixer as well. Okay, so let's take a listen to this with the drums. Now that's nice, but it's a little bit low pitched. In my video I ended up using this synth alone for the verses where I was rapping. We scroll up, we can see the 3 channels of vocals I used for that. 2 panned left and right and one in the center for a nice width to it. Since that way there was not much clashing of frequencies between the rap and the bass, but in the drops, since there were no vocals, I made a much bigger, dirtier top end by copying this bass and changing a few parameters. So let's do that now.